This is the worst luck that can happen in ancient Egypt, being killed by your own brother. But that's exactly what happened to the god Osiris, who was chopped up into 14 pieces by none other than his brother Set, the god of violence and evil. But the story doesn't end there. His widow, Isis, went in search of her husband's scattered body parts and through her powerful magic, brought him back to life briefly so they could conceive their son, Horus, the future king of Egypt. And when Osiris died again, Isis took over his role as ruler of the underworld and became the first female pharaoh of all of Egypt. So let's learn how it all went down in today's episode of Egyptian Mythology Explained. Our story begins with Osiris and his wife Isis ruling over the Egyptian kingdom of Abydos. Now Osiris was the god of the dead, the afterlife, and the underworld, which wasn't as gloomy a task as it sounds today, because back in those days, the Egyptians believed that the afterlife was like a dream, a peaceful place where you got to chill out for eternity. And Osiris was excited about his job because he got to hang out with all of his favorite people, the dead. One day, though, Osiris decided to take a break from the underworld and have some fun in the land of the living. But unfortunately, he didn't get very far before his brother Set paid him a surprise visit. Now, Set was always jealous of his older brother Osiris. He had a massive chip on his shoulder the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and from the moment he learned that Osiris was going to become the pharaoh, Set dedicated his life to destroying his brother's legacy and taking the throne for himself. And seeing Osiris having all the fun in the sun made Set even more mad because he couldn't join in on the festivities. You see, Set was a god of chaos and evil and violence and storms. Basically, he was the Egyptian version of Loki from Norse mythology. In fact, he looks a lot like Loki too. If you want to draw Set, give him green skin, a red crown, a blue beard, a bull tail, and cloven hooves. But then give him horns and the head of a creature that's part bird and part fish and looks like an alien. And if you want to make Loki look Egyptian, just swap out the horns for a crown, the bird tail for a snake tail, and don't give him green skin, but instead make him the same color as Ra, the sun god, because that's how we know Set was a bad dude. He was literally the embodiment of everything that Osiris stood against. Where Osiris brought order and peace, Set brought destruction and violence. And so when Set saw Osiris enjoying himself among the mortals, he felt left out and angry, and he started concocting a plan to ruin his brother's big day. The first step of Set's plan was to invite every god and monster and human to a great feast, which everyone accepted except for one, Osiris. See, Set had hoped to catch Osiris off guard, but word somehow reached the king about the party, and he and Isis decided to go anyway, even though it was a trap. And when they arrived, they were greeted warmly by all their friends. But Set was hiding near the door, waiting for them. And as soon as they stepped inside, he slammed the doors shut, trapping them. Then he called out to the guests, "Whoever fits this golden coffin I have here must be the greatest king of Egypt." And one by one they tried, but it was no use. The coffin was made specifically for Osiris, and it fit him perfectly. So after everyone gave up, Set stood up and shouted, "I am Set, and I am the true king of Egypt." And with that, he chopped Osiris's body up into 14 pieces with his sharp obsidian knife. Then he tossed the pieces into the river Nile, where they floated all the way to the sea and eventually washed up on the shores of the city Byblos. There, Set built a funeral pyre, lit it on fire, and sent ravens to tell all the gods what he had done. And so when Isis heard the news, she immediately set to work assembling her husband's body. She used linen cloth to put him back together and spices to keep him fresh. And when she finished, she laid him in her lap and began to weep. And as her tears fell onto her husband's corpse, he came back to life long enough for her to conceive their son Horus. And after accomplishing this monumental task, Isis knew that she only had moments left with her husband, so she took him down to the river and laid him in a boat covered in black cloth. Then she rowed him upstream until they reached the city of Byblos, where Set had burned Osiris's heart and thrown it into the ground. Isis dug up the heart, placed it in her husband's chest, and performed a resurrection spell. But it was no use. Osiris was dead again, and he wouldn't come back this time. After burying her husband for the second time, Isis flew up into the sky to meet up with her sister Nephthys, who was also an underworld goddess. They mourned for their husband and brother together, and Nephthys suggested that they should build a temple on the site of Osiris's final burial. And so they did. They also persuaded the other gods to help them construct a magnificent monument, and they named it the House of Osiris. Meanwhile, Set returned to his swamp to wait for Horus to grow up so he could destroy him too. In the meantime, Isis continued to travel around Egypt, disguising herself as a mortal woman so that no one would recognize her as a goddess. She settled down in the city of Geme and had a son named Anubis who would later guide the souls of the dead into the afterlife. But not long after giving birth, Isis was spotted by none other than Set, who transformed himself into a crocodile and tried to devour her. Luckily, she escaped and fled into the wilderness, where she encountered a tree that was trying to be pulled out of the ground by two demons. Isis asked them why they were doing this, and they replied that it was Set's orders. So Isis helped the tree fight off the demons, and as a reward, it granted her wish to be turned into a cat, which would protect her from Set while also allowing her to spy on him. And that's exactly what happened. Set didn't suspect a thing and thought he finally had the upper hand, but Isis had already sent word to her son Horus that she had become a cat, and she told him that whenever he saw her, he had to kill her, because that meant that Set had found him. Now Horus grew up to be a fierce warrior, and when he was finally old enough to take on his uncle, Set, he tracked his father's killer to his lair and challenged him to a series of contests. The first contest was a boat race, but Set cheated and sank Horus's boat. So Horus won the second contest, a wrestling match, by knocking Set into a marsh. After that, Set ran away, and Horus pursued him until they arrived at the city of Byblos, where Set challenged Horus to a third and final contest, to see who was the stronger magician. Horus gathered all the magicians he could find, while Set recruited all the evil sorcerers and witches, and together they unleashed every spell they knew. But Horus was victorious, and he cast a spell that turned Set's followers into frogs and toads. And then Horus turned to his uncle and said, "You've caused me nothing but pain and sorrow. Now I will do to you as my father did to you and chop you up into 72 pieces." But Set begged for mercy and promised to stop causing trouble for Egypt, and Horus agreed to spare his life. With that, their conflict came to an end, and Horus took his rightful place as king of Egypt, while Set kept his place as god of evil and chaos. But now he also became the patron deity of Lower Egypt, and that's how Egypt came under the rule of Horus, the son of Osiris. But what about Osiris? Well, although he was murdered by his brother, he still had one last trick up his sleeve. As the god of the afterlife, he could grant or withhold the kingdom of the dead. And after weighing the pros and cons, he decided to pass on the position to his wife Isis. So that's how Isis became the first female pharaoh of all Egypt. However, she didn't abandon her role as a goddess, and she continued to protect and guide the dead into the afterlife with the help of her son Horus and daughter Nephthys. In fact, the four of them ruled Egypt as a family for thousands of years, until the world came to an end. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for watching. And if you liked the video, please show your support. We'll see you next time.